here's the big question. You're interested in value investing and valuing and evaluating businesses on a deep level, but you don't know how, even after researching for hours, probably dozens of hours, hundreds of hours on the internet, and because nobody else shows you how to do it. This podcast has all those answers and much more about value investing and finance. My name is Jason Rivera. Welcome to Value Investing in Your Car.
Hey, Jason here. Today's episode of Value Investing in Your Car, I'm going to share my number one rule that I share with all investors. I've developed this over 13 plus years, and this rule is so important I never, ever break it. Before I get to that, though, I need to let you know you can get this series or this video as a podcast anywhere in the world for free on all major podcasting platforms, iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Anchor, Spotify, and more. You can get this video as part of the Value Investing in Your Car series on all those major podcasting platforms for free. Okay. The reason I'm sharing this with you today is because pretty much everybody in the world of investing and value investing tries to make things super complicated. Or they actually do make things super complicated when they invest in stocks, real estate, whatever it is. They make things super complicated. What I try to do in everything I do, and I teach this to my students as well, is I try to make everything as simple as possible. So today I'm going to share with you the number one rule that I share with all investors. I share this with all my students, share this with anybody who's asking me about potentially investing. I share this with anybody who's interested in the market. This rule is so important I never, ever break it. Ever. There are no exceptions to this rule. Most rules, there are exceptions. There's a saying in the U.S., there's an exception to every rule. There is not an exception in my book to this rule. That's how important it is. The reason, before I share that though, I need to share why simplifying things are so important. It clarifies things so it's easy to understand. That the way, and I was taught this when I first learned writing, is if you can't explain it to a sixth grader, you don't understand it well enough yourself. Or if you don't explain something in terms a sixth grader can understand, you don't understand it well enough yourself. So I try to do that in everything I do to help clarify things, to make it easy to understand for everybody, to make it easy to follow, to make it easy to do pretty much everything. Easier, especially because investing and value investing is, and it can be very complex, especially some of the calculations, valuations, stuff like that. The analyzing balance sheets, analyzing income statements, cash flow statements, reading through financial reports, that stuff can get super complicated. So I like to boil things down and make things as easy to understand as possible. I started doing this years ago after learning the concept of mental model from Charlie Munger. So this, you can call this a rule, you can call this a mental model, same thing. So now let me share with you the number one rule I never break. I share with every single student. Do not ever invest in an investment of any kind if you can't trust the managers or the people running the operation, or in the case of stocks, if you can't trust the people running the business. Ever. If you can't, for example, if you're reading through a financial report of a company, you're reading Google News and its presentations and watching its webcast and reading its investor relations stuff, and you get kind of a funny feeling that maybe they're not telling you the full truth, or maybe they don't have your best interests at heart, you should not invest in the stock, ever. This one rule is so important because why should you invest in something if you don't trust the managers? If you're going to take an activist position, which I don't do, that would be a time to break this rule. At this point in my career, I don't take the activist positions. I try to either work with the managers. In the past, I've tried to do that, or I've stayed away if I didn't feel I could trust the managers. If I can't trust the managers have the best interests of all shareholders, meaning themselves, me, you, everybody, at heart. I do not invest in the stock no matter what. This saves me an enormous amount of time getting rid of crap companies faster. It saves me an enormous amount of time by discarding companies that are kind of on the edge. Their numbers look great, their valuations look great, but their management is kind of saves me an enormous amount of time. If the numbers look great, valuations look great, but the management, I don't feel I can trust them 100% to do what is right, to do what is best for the company, to do what is best for shareholders, I do not invest in the stock, no matter what. This is the number one rule or number one mental model, again, whatever you want to call it, to me. Again, I never break this rule. If I become an activist investor at some point, which I don't envision myself doing, maybe I would look to replace management. But then again, I would look to or I realized that Warren Buffett's saying that you need to find a business and invest in a stock that a monkey could run, because eventually one will, is the more you need to rely on the business model, the economics of the company, management. If it's good, great. That's icing on the cake. But you should, at minimum, be able to trust them. If you don't, they can ruin the company. They can ruin or they can waste an enormous amount of capital. They can dilute shareholders. They can issue enormous amounts of debt, go bankrupt, all these things. Again, it doesn't matter to me what the valuation is. If something I think is undervalued by an enormous amount, let's say I think it's worth, or its value is $10 and it's selling on the market for $1, so a 10x potentially, I won't invest in the stock. This goes for Warren Buffett type compounders that I invest in. This goes for special situations that I invest in. This goes for even NCAV companies, which normally you wouldn't even really look at management. Most NetNet or NCAV investors don't even look at management. I don't even invest in a NetNet or an NCAV situation if I can't trust managers. Because if they're poor management, yes, the valuation may get fixed at some point due to a catalyst, due to market finding the company being massively undervalued, something like that. But if I still can't trust management, I still don't invest personally, because they could burn through cash, they could burn through capital, they could be committing fraud, they could be taking the capital out of the company and paying themselves an enormous amount in dividends, even though the company's not doing well, stuff like that. So this is my number one rule investing. I tell all of my students this. Anybody who asks about investing in the stock market, if you can't trust management, do not invest. So how do you actually evaluate the management to trust them? By reading financial reports, by reading years of financial reports, the annual reports, by reading presentation or watching presentations, either the video presentations or the slide decks or whatever they prepare, reading investor releases. If they, to me, are not being fully transparent, for example, a real world example is, let's say the company's doing horribly and they were doing kind of okay and then they just tanked. If they blame 100% of their problems on, let's say, the coronavirus that we're dealing with today, to me, that's a red flag. It is a major red flag. Depends on their industry. If they're in the hotels or restaurants or airlines or something directly massively affected by the coronavirus, which is essentially unforeseen circumstance, I'll give that business a kind of a pass on that. But I want them to be as transparent as possible. If they're having problems, I want to know what the problems are, and how they're going to fix them. If I don't want them to essentially sugarcoat everything and say, oh, this isn't our fault, we couldn't do anything. I want to see, this is what happened, this is where we got messed up, this is what we're doing to fix it. If they say everything's great, everything's fine, everything's going to keep going straight up, there's no problems, stuff like that. When there are problems, and let's say This is another real world example that I've dealt with. Companies' revenue is kind of going like this, or even slightly up, and then it goes down, or their metrics or their profitability goes down quite a bit. I want to know why. If they don't tell me why and they say everything's still great when margins are cratering, that's a big problem. If they blame stuff again, but outside of the coronavirus stuff, because that was essentially a unforeseen circumstance that I think is going to transform the world. If something happened in their industry that they should have seen coming, but they don't mention it and they say, we didn't see this coming, we weren't prepared for this, that's a red flag. If they say they saw it coming, like Kodak years ago, they saw the digital revolution coming, but they chose not to do anything about it. They chose to keep with the cash flow they were earning then, instead of taking the short-term hit and riding the wave of the future. They saw it coming. They actually almost 100% accurately predicted the rise of digital cameras and how much profitability and revenue that would generate. But they chose to stay in their current operations. That's management not doing their job. That's management not being trustworthy. That's management being short-sighted. That's another example. The main thing to me, though, is personally, and this will come with you reading more annual reports, more news about the company, more IR reports, you'll kind of get a feel of, are they telling you the truth? Are they sugarcoating things? Are they being too optimistic? All those things, you'll kind of get a feel the more annual reports you read of a company. But for me, the biggest kind of red flag is, are they using shareholder capital for things they shouldn't be using shareholder capital for? Another real world example in the past is Wendy's years ago, and I don't know if they still do this, but their owner at the time, again, I don't know if he's still an owner, Nelson Peltz, through his company Trian Partners, billionaire, owned a huge chunk of Wendy's, but he was using shareholder or money from the company to pay for security for his own family. Dude's a billionaire, can afford his own security, but instead that money is going from shareholders and from growing the operations, from reinvesting in the company, to his personal usage. Again, $100,000 at $1 billion plus company is not a huge amount of money, but I want them to, again, have shareholders' best interests, all shareholders' best interests at heart, not just, it's $1 billion or multi-billion dollar company, this is a small amount of money. I don't want them to think like that. I want them to think that every dollar is important type of thing. And plus, he's a billionaire. He can afford his own security. He didn't need the shareholder capital. Another example from Wendy's. They had a private jet, again, years ago, that the company board members and executives and stuff like that could use, and their wives and family members could go on the plane if they were going for a business purpose. Again, it's not a big deal, but that is essentially a waste of shareholder capital, because you can say anything is business. If you talk about business for an hour, or you talk about businesses at all during a lunch meeting, for example, you can count that as a taxable write-off because you talk business. But this is at another huge scale with family members and stuff like that using a private jet. Again, another example, not a big kind of money problem, but that's another red flag that bothered me, because they're not being stewards of shareholder capital. They were kind of being frivolous, in my opinion. There were some other issues with Wendy's that were more serious, that kind of, these all combined added up to me not to buy the stock in that company at that time, because I didn't trust that they were using shareholder capital or at the best ability for all shareholders. Another example is capital allocation. Are they allocating capital well enough? Are they allocating capital well at all? Where could they be better allocating capital? If they're earning 1% returns on their invested capital, while their competitors in the industry are earning 5 or 10% returns on their invested capital, that's probably not a good sign that they are doing a good job. Or that's definitely not a good sign that they're doing a good job. That shows they're doing a poor job. So that shows me that they either don't know what they're doing, or they're at some kind of competitive advantage, or they shouldn't be trusted to kind of manage the company the way they're managing the company. Those are some real world examples. But again, this will kind of be based on your personal preferences and biases after you read more financial reports, news about the company, presentations. I just want them, more or less, I want them to be straightforward and honest. If there's problems, tell me what the problems are. Tell me what the solutions are you're working towards. Don't say everything's great when it's not great. Don't say stuff like that. Don't blame stuff on other people. Again, the coronavirus stuff aside, if it's something they should have foreseen, if it's something in their industry they should have foreseen, if it's some kind of technological change they should have foreseen, if it's something, a supply chain issue they should have foreseen, if it's something they should have foreseen and they didn't, and they're kind of blaming it on somebody else, that's another problem with me. I want them to take essentially ownership of it and, hey, we screwed up. I'd rather them say, hey, we screwed up something, and again, they're never going to say this exactly explicitly like this, but I'd rather have them say something like, we screwed up, here's what happened, here's what we saw, here's what we thought, here's what we're going to do to fix it going forward. I'd rather have somebody say that than kind of essentially lie to you and say, blah, 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 this was somebody else's fault, this wasn't my fault, we didn't foresee this coming, even though they probably should have. I want them to take ownership. I want them to be responsible. I want them to be trustworthy. So I know this is a little bit more vague than some of the stuff I talk about with exact metrics that you can measure and case studies and valuations and stuff like that. But if you feel you can't trust management 100%, you shouldn't invest in the stock. Because as outside investors, we are at a massive disadvantage to the insiders and their books and the actual specific day-to-day operations and finances and stuff like that. We have to be able to trust that what we're reading in financial docs and being told in investor relations releases and presentations and stuff like that, that what we're being told is true. If you can't trust that it's true, you shouldn't invest in the stock or investment ever. Again, this rule is so important. I never break it, ever. Ever. I can't think of a time I've ever broken this rule, and it's saved me an enormous amount of time, enormous amount of frustration. And frankly, investment capital as well in the portfolios I manage, just this one rule. And again, it's simple. If you can't trust something, don't invest in it. At the beginning of this video, I said I like to break everything down as simple as possible. This is as simple as it gets. If you can't trust something, don't invest in it. But it will save you an enormous amount of time, frustration, capital, investment money, everything. It's probably my favorite mental model, again, rule, whatever you want to call it. And it's the most valuable. If you can stick to this, and again, it does, because there will be cases where you come up against something that's massively undervalued, say has a massive upside, but you might be a little bit iffy on management. The longer you do this, the more you will kind of come up against that possibility. So you need to stick to it. And sometimes you may be wrong. Sometimes more often though, you're going to be right in your feelings of staying away from management you can't trust. So that's all we can do in this investing game, is try to increase our odds and our probabilities of success. And this will drastically increase your probabilities and odds of success over the long term if you can stick to it. So I hope this helped. If you want more information and some of our great tips, you can get the link below to our guide, 7 tips to picking great stocks. This rule is part of that doc. There's also 3 times you must sell after you've bought, 10 tips to become a world-class value investor, and other things in that free report as well that you can get below this video for free. And all you have to do is input your name and email address, and you can get that report that one person said, Gustavo G said is worth more than its weight in gold, which is pretty cool. Gustavo, thank you for that. But so I hope if you want to learn more, take advantage of that, get that for free down below. And until next time, if you're watching on YouTube, like, love, share, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you're notified every time we release a new video. If you're listening on the podcast, all that same stuff, like, love, share, subscribe, and comment. And we really appreciate a review. The more views, listens, and reviews we get, the more people we can help with our content. So we really appreciate that as well. And until next time, I'd love to hear your comments on this. What is your number one rule for investing? Did I miss anything? Is this too simplistic? Is it too complex? Let me know in the comments below. And until next time, I'll talk to you again soon. Have a great day. Bye.